There is a difference between being alone and being lonely. Most people sense this intuitively, but would struggle to articulate it precisely. You can be surrounded by people and feel profoundly lonely. You can be completely alone and feel nothing resembling loneliness at all. The two states share the circumstance of social absence, but almost nothing else. They feel different, they produce different physiological responses, and the research suggests they do entirely different things to the brain. This distinction matters because the modern world has developed a serious confusion about solitude. In a culture that measures productivity by output, connection by follower count, and value by visibility, time spent alone has become something to explain or justify. Solitude has acquired a faint odor of failure, as if the person choosing to spend time alone must be doing so because no better option is available. The research tells a very different story. Solitude chosen and well used is not the absence of something valuable. It is the presence of something that cannot be achieved any other way. And understanding what that something is may be one of the more practically important things you can learn about your own cognitive and psychological architecture. Let's begin with the brain. When you are engaged with other people, in conversation, in collaboration, in social situations of any kind, your brain is performing an extraordinarily demanding set of tasks simultaneously. It is tracking the words being said and their literal meaning. It is tracking the tone, the facial expressions, the body language, the social subtext. It is modeling the mental states of the people around you, running what psychologists call theory of mind processes, generating predictions about what they are thinking and what they are likely to do next. It is monitoring your own social presentation, managing what you are revealing and what you are concealing. It is tracking the social dynamics of the group, who has status, who is aligned with who is watching what, and it is doing all of this while also generating your own contributions to the interaction. This is cognitively expensive. The social brain is one of the most metabolically demanding systems in the human body. The constant processing required by sustained social interaction consumes significant neural resources, and those resources are being directed outward, toward the social environment, rather than inward, toward reflection, integration, and the processing of experience. Solitude removes this demand. When you are genuinely alone, the outward-directed attentional systems can relax, and what happens in that relaxation is not nothing. It is something neuroscientists have been studying intensively for the past 2 decades, and what they have found is that the resting brain is not a quiet brain. It is a brain engaged in a different and equally important set of processes. The discovery that changed how neuroscientists think about the resting brain was the identification of what is now called the default mode network, sometimes abbreviated as the DMN. The default mode network is a set of interconnected brain regions that become most active precisely when the brain is not engaged in demanding external tasks. When you are not solving a problem, not interacting with others, not attending to a specific external stimulus, the default mode network lights up. The regions of the default mode network include the medial prefrontal cortex, which is involved in self-referential thinking and social cognition, the posterior cingulate cortex, which is involved in autobiographical memory and self-reflection, the angular gyrus, which is involved in integrating multiple types of information, and the hippocampus, which is involved in memory consolidation and spatial navigation. Together, these regions form a network that is most active during what we casually call mind-wandering, daydreaming, or simply being lost in thought. For many years, researchers assumed that this network represented noise, the brain idling between tasks. The resting state was seen as a baseline, a neutral condition to compare against the interesting stuff that happened during active task performance. But the deeper researchers looked into the default mode network, the more it became clear that this was not idling. It was doing something specific, important, and irreplaceable. What the default mode network is doing during solitude includes several processes that are simply not available to the brain during sustained social engagement. The first is autobiographical memory consolidation. The DMN is heavily involved in the process of integrating recent experiences into the long-term autobiographical record. It connects new experiences to existing memories, finds patterns, builds narratives, and extracts meaning from what has happened. This process requires quiet. It cannot be done effectively while the brain is simultaneously managing social interaction. The processing of experience, the making of meaning from what you have lived through, happens in the space that solitude provides. The second process is prospective thinking, which researchers sometimes call mental time travel. The DMN supports the brain's ability to project forward in time, to simulate future scenarios, to imagine possible futures and evaluate them against each other. This is one of the most cognitively sophisticated capacities human beings possess, the ability to model not just the present but the future, to run mental simulations of events that have not yet occurred, and use those simulations to guide current choices. It requires the kind of sustained, undirected cognitive engagement that is almost impossible to maintain when the brain is occupied with social demands. The third process is creative insight. The relationship between solitude and creative output has been documented across centuries of testimony from artists, writers, scientists, and thinkers. The Romantic poets sought solitude in nature deliberately and described what it produced in their work. Charles Darwin walked his thinking path every day, alone, and many of his most important insights came during these solitary walks. Isaac Newton's most productive period was the plague years at Woolsthorpe, when he retreated from Cambridge and worked in isolation. Einstein described his best thinking as happening in states of reverie that were not compatible with social engagement. Modern neuroscience has begun to explain why this pattern exists. When the prefrontal cortex is occupied with social demands, the executive function systems that manage focused attention are engaged in tracking, predicting, and responding to the social environment. The kind of loose associative thinking that allows distant concepts to connect in novel ways, the mental wandering that produces creative insight, requires the relaxation of this focused attentional control. Solitude, by removing the social demands that keep executive function tightly engaged, allows a different kind of cognitive mode to emerge. Amos Storr, the psychiatrist and author who wrote one of the most comprehensive accounts of solitude, documented the consistent testimony of highly creative individuals that their best work emerged not from collaboration, but from periods of sustained alone time. He argued that the capacity for solitude was not a compensatory mechanism for those who lacked social skill, but a positive capacity in its own right, essential for the kind of self-realization that requires deep engagement with one's own inner world. But solitude's effects on the brain extend beyond creativity and cognitive processing. The research on attention restoration theory, developed by Rachel and Stephen Kaplan in the 1980s and supported by substantial subsequent evidence, proposes that directed attention, the kind of focused voluntary attention we use for demanding tasks and social engagement, is a finite cognitive resource that becomes depleted with use. And one of the most reliable ways to restore depleted directed attention is exposure to environments that engage involuntary attention without demanding directed effort. Natural environments, and more broadly conditions of quiet solitude, allow the directed attention systems to rest while the involuntary attention systems engage gently with the environment. This is why a walk in a park feels cognitively restorative in a way that an hour in a busy shopping mall does not, even if both involve the same amount of physical activity. The park engages attention without demanding it. The mall demands attention continuously. Solitude in natural or quiet environments restores the attentional resource that social and task demands deplete. The implications for how most people structure their days are significant. The modern urban professional life is structured almost entirely around directed attention demands. The open-plan office, the continuous stream of messages and notifications, the expectation of constant availability, the social demands of a connected working environment, all of these consume directed attention continuously without providing the conditions under which it can be restored. The feeling of cognitive depletion that many people experience by the middle of the afternoon is not simply tiredness, it is attention fatigue, the depletion of a specific cognitive resource that does not recover through passive entertainment or social engagement but does recover through genuine solitude. There is another dimension of solitude's effects that the research has illuminated, and it concerns identity and self-knowledge. The philosopher Charles Taylor has argued that one of the distinctive challenges of modern life is the difficulty of maintaining a coherent and authentic sense of self in an environment that is saturated with external demands, social mirrors, and competing narratives about who you should be. The continuous social engagement of modern connected life means that self-concept is constantly being negotiated, performed, and adjusted in response to social feedback. There is very little space for the kind of quiet engagement with one's own values, preferences, and commitments that might be called self-knowledge. Solitude creates that space. In the absence of social demands and social mirrors, what remains is something closer to the unperformed self. The thoughts and feelings that arise in genuine solitude are not being shaped by the anticipation of social response. They are, in some sense, more authentically one's own than the thoughts and feelings that emerge in the performance of social engagement. This does not mean that solitude produces perfect self-knowledge. The mind in solitude can be as confused, as distorted, as prone to error as the mind in company. But it provides a different kind of information, the information that comes from genuine introspection rather than social performance. And some of the most important things people know about themselves, their deepest values, their genuine preferences, the things that matter to them when no one is watching, are available only in that quieter register. The research on mindfulness and contemplative practices, which are in their essence structured forms of solitude, provides some of the most rigorous evidence for solitude's psychological effects. Studies examining experienced meditators have found differences in the structure and function of their brains compared to non-meditators, increased cortical thickness in regions associated with attention and self-awareness, changes in the connectivity of the default mode network that are associated with reduced rumination and increased well-being, reduced activation of the amygdala in response to stressors. These are not the effects of passive rest. They are the effects of sustained, practiced engagement with one's own inner experience in the absence of external social demands. The research on mindfulness has also produced one of the more surprising findings about the relationship between solitude and well-being. Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert's 2010 study using experience sampling methods to track people's thoughts and feelings in real time found that people spent approximately 47% of their waking hours thinking about something other than what they were doing. This mind-wandering, this spontaneous engagement of the default mode network was more common during social activities than during any other type of activity except perhaps passive rest. And critically, people were significantly less happy when their minds were wandering than when they were focused on what they were actually doing, regardless of whether the activity itself was pleasant. The interpretation of this finding has been debated. Some researchers see it as evidence that mind wandering is inherently detrimental, but a more nuanced reading suggests that the problem is not mind wandering itself, which when it occurs in genuine solitude can be enormously productive and restorative. The problem is mind wandering that occurs against a backdrop of social engagement, the half-present state where you are neither fully engaged with others nor fully available to your own inner life. The condition that produces the lowest well-being is not solitude, it is partial engagement, the state of being neither here nor there, neither genuinely connected to others nor genuinely connected to yourself. This points toward the most practically important insight from the research on solitude. The quality of solitude matters as much as its quantity. Genuine solitude, chosen, undistracted, and sustained, produces the benefits that research has documented. Pseudo-solitude, the kind where you are physically alone but continuously tethered to social demands through your phone, does not. The brain cannot enter the default mode processes that solitude enables while it remains on alert for social interruption. The notifications are not neutral, each one is a social trigger, a signal that someone somewhere is attempting to engage your social attention. And the anticipation of such triggers, even when they are not actually occurring, is sufficient to keep the social monitoring systems partially engaged and prevent the full relaxation of outward-directed attention that genuine solitude requires. This is not an argument for permanent disconnection. Social engagement, meaningful relationship, and genuine connection are among the most powerful contributors to human well-being that the research has identified. The point is not that solitude is better than connection. It is that solitude and connection are different things that serve different functions, that each provides something the other cannot, and that the modern tendency to treat all time alone as time to be optimized with digital social engagement may be inadvertently destroying a resource that is both rare and irreplaceable. The capacity for solitude may be one of the more important capacities a human being can develop, not as an end in itself, not as an escape from the world, but as the condition in which certain essential processes of the mind can occur, processes of integration, reflection, creativity, attention restoration, and self-knowledge that cannot be crowded out without consequence. The world will give you very little solitude unless you protect it, and what happens in that protected quiet may matter more than most of what happens in the noise. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you find this video interesting, please consider subscribing for more content like this.